right, you soft-skinned land crawlers. Before I tell you about the day I watched my best friend get eaten alive by something that shouldn't exist, and before I explain why I haven't slept in 3 years without screaming, I need you to do something for me. If you're watching this tale on one of those magic mirror boxes your descendants use, the ones that steal souls and show pictures, I need you to hit that little thumbs up rune. Yeah, that one. Subscribe to my channel of nightmares. And in the comments below, I want you to tell me, what would you do if you woke up one morning and found your crewmate's face hanging from the mast like a wet flag, still blinking? Yeah, that's what I thought. You'd piss yourself and run. But me, I had breakfast first. October 23rd, 854 AD. The North Sea, somewhere between, oh shit, and we're all gonna die. That was the day I learned why they call it the Dark Ages. Spoiler alert, it ain't just about the lack of streetlights. My name's Ragnar Eriksson. Most folks called me the Wet. Not 'cause I was always soaked in seawater, but 'cause I had a nasty habit of pissing myself during battle. Don't judge me. You ever fought a Saxon berserker hopped up on mushrooms and Jesus juice? Yeah, your bladder would give up too. I was the captain of the Serpent's Nightmare, a longship that looked like it was carved from the devil's own driftwood. Longships were single-masted clinker-built ships, intended for speed with the ability to carry a large crew of warriors, and brother, we needed every inch of speed we could get. My crew? A collection of the most psychotic, loyalty-sworn maniacs you've ever seen. Bjorn No-Face Ironson. Got his nickname after a Celtic monk threw holy water at him and it melted half his cheek off. Turns out the monk was actually a witch and the holy water was, well, let's just say it wasn't blessed. Thorgrim the Twitchy, our navigator. He could read the stars like a book, but also talk to his pet raven about conspiracy theories involving sea monsters working for the Pope. Helga Bloodbraid Gudmundsdottir, the only woman brave enough to sail with us. She kept her enemy's teeth braided into her hair. When she laughed, it sounded like bones breaking. And little Eric, who was neither little nor named Eric, but got the nickname because he once fit inside a barrel to sneak into a monastery, came out 3 days later, completely insane, speaking only in Latin prayers and asking for cheese. Now, you modern folks think you know what pirates were like. You've seen the movies. The rum, the parrots, the yo-ho-ho nonsense. Bullshit. Real pirates in the 9th century? We were basically floating serial killers with a small business plan. The most widely recognized pirates in medieval Europe were the Vikings, seaborne warriors from Scandinavia who raided and looted mainly between the 8th and 12th centuries. But what the history books don't tell you is that we weren't just raiding for gold and glory. We were running from something worse than death. Running from them. See, most people think the worst thing about the Dark Ages was the plague or the lack of dentists, or the fact that everyone smelled like rotting fish in despair. Nah, the worst thing was that the monsters were real, and they were hungry. That morning, October 23rd, started like any other day of maritime terrorism. We'd been sailing for 3 days straight, heading toward the coast of what you now call northern England. Had intelligence about a rich monastery there. Fat monks hoarding gold while peasants starved. Easy pickings, or so we thought. The sun came up like a bloody wound in the sky. The sea was calm as glass, too calm. Thorgrim was muttering to his raven about unnatural stillness and the breath of drowned gods. I told him to shut up and check the wind. Big mistake, because that's when we saw it. floating in the water about 100 yards starboard. A ship, but not just any ship. A ship that had been underwater for at least 50 years. Barnacles covering the hull like chainmail. Seaweed hanging from the rigging like funeral shrouds. And the smell. Imagine if you took a whale, stuffed it with rotting meat, then let it ferment in a sewer for a decade. That was the perfume coming off this thing. But here's the kicker, and this is where it gets really fucked up. There were people on board, moving around, working the rigging, singing. They were singing sea shanties, in perfect harmony, with no tongues. You'll think ghost stories are scary now? You got movies about possessed dolls and haunted apps on your magic talking rectangles. But let me tell you something. When you see a dead man trying to tie a bowline knot with fingers that are mostly bone, and he's humming while he does it, that's when you realize your ancestors' nightmares were way more creative than yours. We didn't have jump scares back then. We had jump into the ocean and pray the sea serpents eat you before the ghost pirates do scares. So there we were, staring at this impossible thing. The crew was getting restless. Bjorn was making the sign of the cross with his remaining fingers. Helga was unconsciously reaching for her axe. And little Eric? Little Eric was excited. "Captain!" he yells, bouncing up and down like a kid who just found a dead bird. That's the Bone Maiden, the legendary ghost ship of Captain Grimm the Deathless. I looked at him like he'd just announced he was pregnant with a sea monster. "How the hell do you know that?" I asked. "I read it in a book." "You can't read." "I can read dead languages." That's when I remembered why we called him Little Eric. Not because of his size, but because he had a little bit of everyone's soul that he'd collected over the years. Don't ask. Now, any sane captain would have ordered hard port and sailed away faster than a tax collector from a leper colony. But I wasn't sane. None of us were. We were Vikings. We sailed toward danger like moths toward flame. Except the flame was usually someone else's burning village. "All right, you magnificent bastards," I announced to my crew. "We're going aboard." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear barnacles growing on the hull. Then Thorgrim's raven cawed once. It sounded like laughter. Here's what you need to understand about the Dark Ages. We didn't have health insurance. We didn't have therapy. We didn't have safety regulations or occupational hazards training. What we had was alcohol, ignorance, and the unshakable belief that if you died in battle, you'd go to Valhalla where you could drink and fight forever. Which honestly sounded like a pretty good deal. So we rowed over to the Bone Maiden. And that's when the screaming started. Not from us, from the ship. The entire vessel was screaming. The wood itself, the rigging, the sail. And with every bite, I felt myself slipping away. The food wasn't just horrible, it was converting me, turning me into one of them. My fingernails started growing longer. My teeth got sharper. My eyes began to burn with that same terrible starlight. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, tasted good. Better than anything I'd ever eaten while alive. And I wanted more. Y'all ever been to one of those fancy restaurants where they serve you foam and tell you it's deconstructed soup? Where you pay $50 for 3 bites of something that looks like it was scraped off a sidewalk? That's what normal food tastes like compared to ghost cuisine. The dead know how to cook. They just use ingredients that'll damn your soul. It's like, imagine if Gordon Ramsay was a necromancer and his kitchen was located in hell. That's what I was dealing with. By the time the sun was halfway to the horizon, I was barely human anymore. I could see in the dark. I could hear the conversations of fish a mile away. I could taste the fear of my crew across the water. And I was hungry, not for food, for souls. That's when little Eric did something that probably saved us all. He started singing. Not a sea shanty, not a war song, a lullaby. A lullaby my grandmother used to sing to me when I was a child, about a brave little boat that sailed through storms to bring her papa home. The effect was immediate. The ghost crew stopped what they were doing. Their hollow eye sockets turned toward the sound, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker in those depths. Memory, humanity, pain. Grandpa Grimm let out a wail that shattered every piece of glass on both ships. The Bone Maiden began to shake and buckle. "Stop him!" Grandpa Grimm screamed. "Stop him before!" But it was too late. The lullaby was working like a reverse curse, reminding the dead of what they'd lost. And what they'd lost was everything. Uncle Sven fell to his knees, black tears streaming down his face. I remember my daughter's laugh. Cousin Magnus was clutching his head. The smell of fresh bread, the warmth of a woman's touch. One by one, the ghost crew began to remember what it meant to be human. And it was agony. That's when I realized what I had to do. I grabbed a harpoon from the deck and drove it through my own chest. Not to kill myself, though honestly that would have been a mercy. To anchor my soul to the living world. The pain was incredible, like being struck by lightning while swallowing molten metal. But it worked. The starlight faded from my eyes. My fingernails stopped growing. My teeth returned to their normal, disappointing dullness. I was human again, and I was pissed. You want to know what the living have that the dead don't? I screamed at Grandpa Grimm. We have the right to choose. I pulled the harpoon from my chest and threw it at him. Passed right through him, of course. He was already dead. But the gesture mattered, because that's when my crew attacked. Not the ghost crew. My crew. They'd been listening to little Eric's lullaby too. And they'd realized something. We were all going to die eventually. We were all going to face the dark. But we were going to do it as ourselves. Bjorn leaped from our ship to the Bone Maiden with his axe raised, screaming a battle cry that would have made Odin himself proud. Thorgrim threw his raven at Uncle Sven's face. And the bird, apparently tired of all the supernatural bullshit, actually started pecking at the ghost's eyes. Helga just started swinging her axe in wide arcs, cutting through rigging and ghost flesh with equal enthusiasm. And little Eric kept singing. The battle was short but brutal. You can't really kill something that's already dead, but you can definitely fuck up their day. We chopped the Bone Maiden to pieces, broke the mast, shredded the sails, smashed the wheel, and with each piece of the ship we destroyed, the ghost crew became more solid, more real, more mortal. That's when I understood. The ship wasn't their prison. It was their life support. Without it, they would finally be able to die. Really die. And find peace. Grandpa Grimm looked at me with his terrible starlight eyes as his form began to fade. "Thank you," he whispered. Thank you for setting us free. And then he was gone. All of them were gone. The Bone Maiden sank beneath the waves, taking with it 30 years of cursed existence. We sailed back to shore in silence. Nobody spoke about what we'd seen. Nobody talked about the feast of horrors or the lullaby that saved us all. But we were different. We'd looked into the abyss and chosen to remain human. And that, my friends, is the most terrifying thing of all. You think that's where the story ends? Oh, you sweet summer children. That was just the beginning. See, when you destroy a ghost ship and free the souls of your cursed relatives, you don't just go back to normal piracy. You become marked. That had cursed Grandpa Grimm in the first place. They noticed what we'd done. And they were not happy. 3 days after the Bone Maiden incident, we were anchored in a secluded bay, trying to process what had happened. Little Eric was still humming lullabies under his breath. Thorgrim's raven had started speaking in Latin. Bjorn was carving protective runes into his axe handle. And Helga? Helga was standing at the bow, staring out at the sea with a look I'd never seen before. Fear. Captain, she said quietly, there's something moving under the water. I looked where she was pointing. The sea was black as pitch, but there was something darker moving beneath it. Something vast. And it was rising. What came out of the water that night wasn't a creature. It was a concept. Imagine if hunger could take physical form. If despair could grow tentacles. If the absolute certainty of death could manifest as a living, breathing thing. Could manifest as a living, breathing thing. That's what we faced. The deep ones weren't just sea monsters. They were the primordial fears that had existed since the first human looked at the ocean and wondered what lurked in its depths. And they were ancient, older than the gods, older than the world itself. The first one that surfaced was the size of a small island. Its body was covered in scales that shifted color like oil on water. It had too many eyes, and each one was focused on our ship. But the worst part? It spoke, not in words, but directly into our minds. You have disrupted the natural order, it said. Asterisk, the dead must serve. The living must feed the dead. This is the way of things. I tried to respond, but my voice wouldn't work. None of us could speak. We were frozen in terror. You freed the souls we had claimed. You must replace them. That's when I realized what we were dealing with. These weren't just monsters. They were administrators. Cosmic bureaucrats with tentacles. And we just violated their filing system. The deep one began to rise further out of the water. Its true size became apparent. It was easily 3 times the length of our ship, with arms that could crush a longhouse like a twig. But little Eric, bless his insane little heart, started singing again. Not a lullaby this time. A war song. The ancient kind. The kind that Vikings sang before they knew they were going to die. The kind that told the gods, we're coming to join you and we're bringing our weapons. And one by one, the rest of us joined in. Even Thorgrim's raven was cawing along. We couldn't fight this thing. We couldn't run from it. We couldn't negotiate with it. But we could face it as Vikings, as humans. As a family. The deep one paused, its massive head tilted, like it was listening to something it hadn't heard in millennia. You choose to die rather than serve? Damn right we do, I managed to croak. This is unexpected. And then something miraculous happened. The Deep One began to retreat. Not because it was afraid of us, we were like ants to it, but because it was confused. Turns out, the Deep Ones had been dealing with humans for so long, they'd forgotten what we were really like. They'd gotten used to people who would trade their souls for power, who would serve eternity to avoid death, who would sacrifice others to save themselves. They'd forgotten about the kind of humans who would stare into the abyss and say, "Fuck you, fish face. We'd rather die free than live as slaves." And that, my friends, is why we survived. Not because we were stronger than the Deep Ones. Not because we were smarter than the Deep Ones. But because we were more human than they expected. Y'all think you know what courage looks like in the modern world. You've got your superhero movies where people in tight costumes save the day with special powers. But real courage? Real courage is looking at something that could erase you from existence and saying, "I'd rather die as myself than live as someone else's puppet." That's what we did. We chose to be human. And sometimes that's the most radical act of all. The Deep Ones retreated to whatever hole they'd crawled out of. But they left us with a warning. You have earned a reprieve, not a victory. Remember us, mortals. Remember what lurks beneath. And then they were gone. We sailed back to shore, but we were different people. We'd seen the machinery behind the world. We'd looked at the cosmic order and told it to go fuck itself. And we'd won. Sort of. Little Eric never spoke again after that night. He just hummed lullabies and smiled at things the rest of us couldn't see. Thorgrim's raven learned to speak perfect Latin, but only quoted funeral rites. Bjorn carved so many protective runes into his axe that it looked like a piece of ancient jewelry. Helga braided sea glass into her hair instead of teeth. Said it helped her remember that some things were worth protecting. And me? I retired from piracy, became a storyteller instead. Because somebody had to remember. Somebody had to tell the tale of the night we chose to be human. Somebody had to warn future generations about what lurks in the deep places of the world. And what lurks in the deep places of ourselves. See, that's the real horror of the Dark Ages. It wasn't the monsters. It was the realization that we all have the potential to become monsters. Every time we choose comfort over courage. Every time we choose slavery over freedom. Every time we choose to serve power rather than serve each other. So let me ask you again. What would you do if you found yourself in that situation? If you were offered immortality at the cost of your humanity? If you could have power, but only if you served something evil? If you could save yourself, but only by sacrificing others? I hope you'd choose what we chose. I hope you'd choose to be human. Even if it kills you. Especially if it kills you. Because that's what separates us from the monsters. Not our strength. Not our intelligence. Not our technology. Our choices. And sometimes the most human choice of all is to choose death over dishonor. The Deep Ones are still out there, you know. In your time, they're called different things. Corporations. Governments. Social media algorithms. But they're the same entities, the same hunger, the same offer. Serve us, and we'll give you comfort. Serve us, and we'll give you security. Serve us, and we'll give you meaning. All you have to do is stop being human. Don't. Choose the storm over the calm. Choose the struggle over the surrender. Choose the pain over the numbness. Choose to be human. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. to the serpent's nightmare and her crew, to little Eric and his lullabies, to Grandpa Grimm and his final rest, to everyone who ever looked at the abyss and said, "Not today," and to you, whoever you are, wherever you are, whenever you are, may you always choose to be human, may you always choose to be free, and may you never, ever serve the deep ones. Now get out of here and go live your lives. The monsters are real, but so are you, and that's what matters.